If you're going through a spiritual awakening, it's entirely likely that at some point you've wrestled with the question, should I tell people about it? It's such a humongous thing. It reframes your entire existence, but we shy away from talking about it because awakening is still unusual in our society and we're worried that people will think we're crazy. In this video, I'm going to offer a point of view as to when you would and wouldn't talk about it, who you might talk to it about, how to handle these kinds of conversations, and why it matters. And in particular, I'll address the question, how should you talk about your awakening with your partner? But first of all, if you're watching this and you're going through a spiritual awakening, congratulations, because you are on the ride of your life, as you probably already know. But that doesn't mean that your old life has just gone away and disappeared. You are still connected to your family and at least some of your friends, and maybe you're still working your old job, at least for the time being. So leaving aside the question of your partner for now, which I'll talk about in just a moment, should you tell these people what's happening to you? Well, here's my suggestion. They are going to know that something is going on. You're fundamentally changing as a person. So really, you want to control the narrative. Otherwise, yes, people who haven't been exposed to someone who's awakening before might well think that you are going crazy. But you don't need to tell everyone everything. I would suggest using 2 rules of thumb to decide how much you want to say. Firstly, how close are you to that person? Is it your best friend or is it your co-worker? People who are nearer to us are going to see the changes more clearly and will need more explanation. Number 2, how likely are they to understand? If they're not awakening, even if they're close to us, too much detail could be overwhelming. On the other hand, we almost always discover people in our outer circle who we're not particularly close to, but who get awakening, and they might even be awakening themselves. Now, often these people become friends and they go on to support us in our journeys. So, calibrate what you share about your awakening to the person you're talking to. And by the way, if there is someone you feel deeply uncomfortable sharing that information with, then of course you don't have to tell them anything at all. White lies are definitely permitted in that case. Now, sometimes when we start off telling someone we're close to about our experience, it's all fine and they're very supportive and interested, even if they're not awakening themselves. But then, as things progress, they become less receptive. And this can be especially true if you're having a very intense awakening, because honestly, it looks pretty chaotic from the outside. And this means we might lose some people while we're on the awakening path. But as I'm sure you probably know, that's part of the process. And if you don't know, I'll link you to a video in the description which will explain more about why we lose friends during the awakening process. So in a moment, I'm going to address how you could handle the conversation about your awakening with your partner, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your husband, your wife. But first of all, what about people you hardly know? People you come across in everyday interactions or new friends? Because as we go through awakening, we often make big changes in our lives and we meet lots of new people who want to know all about us. Now that inevitably throws up some awkward conversational situations. I personally tried a lot of different strategies, including flat out lying about it, which didn't feel right at all. Eventually, I settled on something really simple, which seems to work well, so I'm going to share it with you. If the answer to a question is, because I had a spiritual awakening, I just say it very simply like that, just as a passing fact. And that way, it's up to the listener if they want to pursue the topic. And what I find is, people who aren't interested or who don't really know what it means, they just gloss over it and they move on to something else. But what I've also found is that a small but growing percentage of people become very interested and they go on to ask me lots of questions and I always answer them honestly. And that's because they are almost certainly on the awakening path themselves, even if it's so early they don't realize it yet. And that means they're in your extended soul group and you're either being brought together to support one another or one of you is going to give the other one some kind of message or guidance. Okay, before I share my thoughts on whether it's important to talk about your awakening, let's talk about your partner if you have one. Now, obviously, they are going to know that you're going through an awakening, and obviously, you are going to talk to them about it. But it's important to be aware of a few things. First of all, your partner is unlikely to consciously awaken themselves while you're in the early to mid stages of the awakening journey. In my spiritual awakening coaching practice, I only have one couple who are definitely awakening together, and one is much further ahead than the other one. So what's actually more usual is that your partner has just enough interest in spirituality to be supportive of your experience, but not enough to pursue it themselves. Now, this is very, very typical. It's one of the standard setups for awakening. We are assigned a keeper. A keeper is someone who can provide physical and financial security while we're going through this experience. Now, it's not like that for everyone, but it is pretty common. So if you're in this sort of situation, it's really important to remember that your partner's psyche is not changing and evolving in the same way as yours. Their worldview is not adjusting, they are not receiving messages and signs, they are not connecting with their guides. And for some partners, this can mean that the further you go through awakening, the more distressing they start to find it, because you are inevitably moving apart. You are vibrating at different rates. Now, that doesn't mean that you'll inevitably break up, although some couples do, but it does mean that you need to be sensitive to their experience, not just your own. So you might want to filter what you tell your partner and perhaps reduce how much you talk about what you're going through. It can be pretty wearing for someone who's not going through an awakening to be bombarded with spiritual information, especially if they're not personally that interested. And as you'll know, if you're in it, especially the connection phase, all you really want to do is talk about it. It consumes you. So my advice here is, and please feel free to ignore it because no one knows your relationship better than you do, but my advice is, the second you feel resistance from your partner, adjust how much you're talking to them about what you're experiencing. Dial it down. Make time to talk about the things that they want to talk about. Now, this might give rise to a different type of issue, which is that you find you're unable to calibrate back down to a lower vibrational mode of interaction. And in that case, you're just going to need to see how things develop longer term. Okay, so finally, this is my view on whether or not you should talk about your awakening. Personally, I think it's really important that you talk about it on several levels. First of all, it's important for you. You need support on this journey, and if you're not talking about it, that's going to be really hard to find. Just go in gently and pick the people that you choose to talk to wisely. Secondly, as I mentioned previously, you will help other awakeners by talking about it. They need to know that they're not alone too. And thirdly, one day, everyone on the planet is going to awaken as a rite of passage. So we need to start to normalize the process. It needs to come into the mainstream. And if we don't talk about it, then that's going to be really difficult. So does that mean that you need to start a YouTube channel or a blog or write a book? Well, maybe. If you're supposed to broadcast to a wide audience, your guides will be prodding you that way. However, there is often a contradiction here. The people who have been chosen for awakening at this time tend to dislike the spotlight and are generally quite humble and self-effacing. Now, this is actually intended because if you put the kind of power that awakening gives you into the hands of a megalomaniac, we would be in all sorts of trouble. So instead, the meek are inheriting the new earth, at least in these early stages of the Global Awakening Project. If you're awakening and it's in your plan to broadcast your experience, then this is a hurdle that you'll have to get over. Fortunately, as you shed your ego, you will find it becomes easier and easier to do whatever it is you need to do. So if this describes you, don't worry about it, just trust in the process, which you can find out about in this video.